Good day. You are busy working through a series of videos on lesson planning. In the previous videos, we focused on all the issues that needed your attention before you started writing your lesson plan. We talked about the importance of context. We talked about acknowledging the zone of proximal learning. We talked about working towards constructive alignment. And very importantly, we spent some time looking at how to write a proper lesson plan and lesson outcomes. And now, in this next part of the series, we are really going to focus on the lesson planning itself. So, you will use a lesson planning template. Many subject groups have a very specific template of their own. If your subject group does not have a template, please use a generic one. You will see that we have on Ifundi added some of the lesson plan templates from some subjects that we could acquire. You can also use the 5-minute lesson plan that is part of your portfolio. I want to stress again here that a full-time teacher will not write a lesson plan for every single lesson that they do. They are going to move towards cycle plans and weekly plans and even term plans. But you need to understand the basics of lesson planning on paper, and you need to practice it as much as you can so that it becomes muscle memory, so that you will later plan that lesson in your head and go through all of these steps without even really realizing it. Let's talk about what is going to happen when we start our lesson planning for what will happen from that moment that the bell rings for the lesson to start to the very end. Remember that lesson planning is a holistic activity. You need to look at the period as one whole, not as separate 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here, 5 minutes here. Before we can start filling in our lesson plan template, it's extremely important that we talk about the reasons that people learn. There are 4 reasons that will make a learner take in what you teach him. The first one is novelty. Novelty is when something is cool to know. In this whole COVID-19 crisis, all of a sudden everybody's making use of Zoom. So even children are making use of Zoom to talk to their friends. They very quickly learned what it was and how it works because it is a novelty. It is cool to have. When you are 13 years old, you won't necessarily pay attention to driving, to what your dad does when he uses the clutch and the brake. But when you are 17 and you're going for your learner's permit, you will all of a sudden pay a lot of attention and learn very quickly because it's a novelty. The next one is a need. Learners will learn information when they need to know it. We can again refer to the example of driving a car. You won't really be interested in all the road signs until you need to know them to pass your learners. Or if you are suddenly in love with somebody who speaks a different language, it is a need to learn that language. So you are going to put in a lot of effort to do that. The third reason why people learn is when we can link the learning to real life experience. A very good example here is if you are the life science teacher and you teach cancer, some learners won't really pay attention and they might think it's difficult and they don't really care until somebody that they know are diagnosed with this. Then all of a sudden it really becomes relevant. It becomes linked to real life experience. If you are the life orientation teacher and you are talking about emotionally unhealthy relationships, and I suspect that my friend might be in such a relationship, I'm going to pay extra attention when you teach that lesson today because the content that you are teaching is linking to my own life. The fourth reason people learn, and that is perhaps the strongest one and the most powerful one, is emotion. The moment that the learning evokes emotion in a child, then they will never forget that content that you teach them. You will see in the top 10 tips for teachers that I am sharing with you on Ifundi and Facebook. One of the top 10 tips is that you can not always get learners to love your subject, but you can get them to love you. And once they love you, they will work for you. And that is emotion. The moment that there's a caring relationship, a healthy relationship between a learner and a teacher, that learner will want to learn from you. And that is a very powerful tool. So before you start planning your lesson, you need to decide which one or two, three, maybe, of these reasons am I tapping into in my lesson. Am I teaching this to students because they have to know it or do they want to know it? If I have to teach interest and I just give them the theory, they aren't going to be interested in interest. But if I bring a car advertisement and I say, listen guys, let's buy this car. Okay, now let's work out your monthly premium. How much money are you going to need? Can you afford the picture of the Golf or can you afford the picture of the Porsche that I bought along? And immediately you bring real life into the experience because they will one day buy a car. So suddenly it will make sense to them to understand compound interest and to know why they must know this. When you are planning your lesson, there are 10 aspects that you need to give attention to. And in a good lesson plan template, this will be set out for you in a structured manner. So you will first look at the phases of the lesson. Then you will look at the core of your lesson. What is the most important aspect, piece of content in this lesson? We'll look at prior knowledge, scaffolding. We will spend some time thinking about how do we choose teaching material, how do we choose teaching strategies. We'll look at the learner activities, assessment, and then consolidation. And you'll see I have put introduction way at the bottom. When we get to that video, I will explain why introduction is number 10 and not number 1. The phases of the lesson is important to understand because a lesson needs to be structured. So your lesson will have 3 phases, the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Just 3 quick comments. Somewhere in your lesson, you need to have a wow moment. That one thing that they are going to remember about that lesson. The introduction is important to catch the learner's attention. To say, hi guys, something new is coming. Are you ready? New learning needs to take place in every single lesson, especially for a lesson that you plan for a portfolio or a lesson that you present for assessment. You cannot do revision. You need that excitement of teaching new material. You need to show the assessor that you are capable of teaching new material. Somewhere in your lesson, you need to share the lesson outcomes with the learners. Now, most students will start off a lesson by saying, good morning class, in this lesson we are going to talk about A, B, and C. That is fine, you can do that. But you can also share the outcomes later on in the lesson. It might be that you want students to realize something first, or you want to pique their interest in something, or you want to guide them to a place before you share the lesson outcomes. That is fine. You do not need to do that at the very beginning, but make sure that you do it somewhere in the lesson. It is so important that you have a conclusion and a consolidation. We are going to talk more about that in the video on conclusion. Somewhere you just need to summarize again what you have taught them in that lesson. It is very important that you have assessment throughout the lesson. This will be formal or informal assessment, and we will talk about that in the next lesson more as well. It's very crucial that you have a core of your lesson. The pertinent question. What is the one main idea, the one golden thread in my lesson that runs through the lesson outcomes, through the activities, and through the assessment? And if you remember correctly, I just now talked about constructive alignment. What is the golden thread that aligns my lesson? And it is so important that this is relevant to learners, that it might be something they are interested in. And if it's not something they would naturally be interested in, that is a challenge for you as a teacher. How do I make it interesting? And the answer to this question, how do you make it interesting, is go back to the 4 reasons that learners learn. Which one of those reasons are you tapping into? Because the moment you give a learner a reason to learn something, you are already making a success of your lesson.